You're listening to the Murphology Podcast. Thanks for tuning in to the Murphology Podcast, aka Murph here to share interviews about biking experiences from bicyclists who have pedaled to places all over the U.S. Each week, we will get to know new people and explore new destinations to ride your bike. As you listen to these adventures, you may wonder, why haven't I done that yet? Well, on the podcast today is Robyn Elliott. Hey, Robyn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kathy. How are you?
I'm good. Well, we're recording this in mid-April, so we are still in the middle of this crazy coronavirus pandemic. You know, our worlds are a little bit different than they would be normally, if there's such thing as normal, I guess.
Right.
But you own a pretty cool business called Bicycle Tours of Atlanta. So I wanted to get you on the podcast to learn more about it and just see what it's like being a business owner of bicycle tours, because I'm very intrigued by that. And also, I know that you've been on some bike adventures because I've seen some great photographs on social media. So hopefully you're open to talk about all that.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, first I always ask people that I interview a little bit about yourself. So start out by, I already spoiled it that you live in Atlanta. So sorry about that. But
That's okay. Yeah.
Tell us, what it's like there as far as cycling.
Sure. I am from Atlanta. I actually grew up here with the exception of like 6 years in the Boston area. But I've been back in Atlanta for 21 years, and I've always, I say I've always had a relationship with a bike. Sometimes it's been stronger than other times, but it's the longest relationship I've ever had.
Nice.
So 10 years ago, and actually 11 years ago now, but in 2009 is when I started the business. At that time, I was a very casual rider. I had moved back to Atlanta in 1999. And prior to that, when I was living in the Boston area, I did a good bit of mountain biking at that time. But when I came back to Atlanta, I just never reconnected with those folks necessarily. But in 2008, when the recession hit, I was at that time working in the real estate industry. I was an inspector for new construction. And again, just, kind of doing the casual riding around town, cycling at that time, right around 1999 and 2000. And I'm kind of jumping back, but that's really when things started changing in our city in terms of being a little bit more cycle friendly. But then by 2008, 2009, we had our own Atlanta Bicycle Coalition. We had a new executive director come on. She's been magnificent. She has continued to be, and she really took that that organization to the next level, and in terms of really engaging with our city planners. And today we have, probably around 110 or 120, right around 120 bicycle trails and bike lanes and things like that around the city area, and kind of reaching out a bit. We have a major cycling path called the Silver Comet, which is 63 miles that goes from just the outskirts of the downtown area all the way to the state line of Alabama. We have, other trails throughout the metro region and even reaching further, but we have a good bit of opportunity for people to either cycle hard or slow roll or ride around on their fixie gears, which we have a full range of the bike culture here in Atlanta.
That's nice. And to have that many trails, that director did some major work, because that was over maybe 10, 12 years.
Yeah, over 10 so years. We had some trails in place, but the biggest improvement in our city has been designated protected lanes in our city. That's been one of the biggest changes. Because it's a little harder, obviously, to get actual paths in place, but to be able to go into the city where there's, 4 lanes and have one lane completely dedicated and protected for bikes to ride on is a pretty big deal. And they still fight that fight. So it's really great. Her name is Rebecca Cerner, by the way. I got to give her a shout out.
Yeah, shout out to Rebecca.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, you mentioned that you've got all kinds of different cyclists in your area, and you also mentioned you dabbled in mountain biking when you were in a different city. But what kind
hmm
of biking do you do there now?
Um, well, what's really funny? I got to tell you that since the pandemic,
Hmm.
I'm riding again. I always, would get on my bike maybe 3 times a week, but I never rode really hard. I just didn't have a long history of, I'm going to go out and ride, 30 miles tonight.
Hmm.
And about 3 years ago, I bought a Fuji. And you see, I'm not even so brand oriented, but it's a carbon fiber Fuji bike.
Nice.
And about 6 months ago, I really tried to sell my bike, or I was thinking hard about selling my bike. And thank God I didn't, because now I'm riding.
Mm.
Now I'm going out and I'm doing the 20 miles, 3 and 4 times a week. Last Saturday, I rode 30 miles out to Stone Mountain, and that's actually new for me.
Hmm.
So I am loving it. And if it were not for, the crisis we're in, I wouldn't be back riding the way I did as a much younger person.
Hmm. And I'll speak for myself, but riding bikes at this point, with this whole pandemic going on, is great for me physically, but mentally it's even better because just being outside in fresh air and nobody
Yeah.
else around, just me and my thoughts, it's just
hmm
been super valuable.
It is valuable. And the other really great thing is it's the best time I've ever experienced, I imagine most of us, to actually ride on the streets, because, the motorists are at home.
Right.
The places that I've been able to ride comfortably at any time of the day right now during this is just blown my mind, and it's fantastic.
I
So
agree.
it's a great time if you've been kind of thinking about, oh, I wish I'd hop on a bike and ride. This is the best time ever to do it.
Hmm. And as far as the state of Iowa, hopefully in your state as well, bike shops are still deemed essential.
They
So
are.
you can still get your bike serviced. In Iowa, you can still actually buy a bicycle, but it's kind of a no contact method. So it's, if you're really not sure what you want, it's maybe not the best move. So get the bike out of the garage and get it to a bike shop and tuned up.
Yeah, most of our bike shops are still open, and they are still doing that kind of business, but it's by appointment only.
Hmm.
And I do know that one bike shop owner, she does like a full interview. All those questions that someone would usually be asked in a shop,
Hmm.
how they're riding, what their skill set is, and those sorts of things, and what is your price point. So before they even walk in, I think a lot of these bike shops have 2 or 3 bikes pulled and say, these are your choices.
Yeah.
And I think they do a really good job of knowing if they really have a buyer, because these shops have got to turn over some cash. They've got to
Hmm.
make their own money. So, people who are really serious about wanting to ride right now, at least in my city, you can still get a bike.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness
Yes.
for that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, as far as you mentioned the Silver Comet, which sounds like an amazing trail because it goes for so long, but are there
Yep.
any other specific places to ride in your area that you want to promote?
If people in the Atlanta metro area, as well as when they come to Atlanta, and if you ride a bike or if you're active, you keep hearing about this thing called the Atlanta Beltline.
Mm.
And the Atlanta Beltline is a 22-mile loop that circles the city. However, it's not complete. There's portions of it that are complete. There's about a 7-mile section of it on what we call the East Side Trail. And if you could imagine on a clock, it's like 2 o'clock to, it's probably getting to about 5 o'clock now. Or
Hmm.
um, but the thing is it is so incredibly popular that on a busy day, you usually can't even ride it with a bike because of all the pedestrian traffic. So that's a popular place to ride, when there's not a lot of traffic, which is kind of like now. So people are still utilizing that path.
Hmm.
Inside of about probably 4 years, we may have the entire 22 miles connected. There's different sections of it that are in place, but it's not totally connected. We have another path, it's the Stone Mountain Path, and it goes from almost downtown Atlanta all the way out to Stone Mountain Park. That is 17 miles. So
Mm.
there's another path, and that one is more winding. It is not a rails to trails type of product in the same way that the Silver Comet is. And so the Silver Comet with the exception of a small section of it, is pretty flat,
Mm-hmm.
pretty straight. But the Stone Mountain path is wonderful because it's hilly, it's winding. A couple of times it breaks up, and you can follow the signs to pick it up at the next location. It goes through an incredible little town called Clarkston, Georgia, which is a community that has for probably 25 years been a community where many refugees have settled, and it has over 64 languages that are spoken in that city.
Oh, interesting.
It's a very interesting success story of what the state of Georgia and that city of Clarkston has done to welcome and provide services to those individuals that have been coming into the country for many years,
Mm-hmm.
and, through all the proper channels. And but on that path, you go all the way to Stone Mountain Park. Stone Mountain has a granite mountain in it, and it's about 6 miles around the mountain. So that's a very popular way to get in. I think we're getting close to 40 miles on that. So it's there's that. But then we also have all these beautiful, gorgeous neighborhoods. And back to the mountain biking, we have plenty of mountain biking trails.
Yeah.
Also scattered out in the metro area and then beyond. You don't have to drive far to find mountain biking trails. And from the city of Atlanta, if you're willing to drive an hour and a half, you're going to find magnificent mountain biking trails. But we have some great ones that are closer than that too.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as just, we have a lot of riding clubs. And so, you have the city of Atlanta, but you also have all of these metro areas and all these other cities. So almost every city surrounding us has their own cycling clubs. I mean, so there's a tremendous amount of road bike riding that goes on in our region. And then in the city, though, you get a little bit quirkier and crazier and a little bit more fun because you do have your fixie gear community. We have critical mass. I'm sure you or your listeners, I mean, you know what critical mass is, or do you?
Well, explain it. I mean, I do
Oh,
I do
cool.
know what it is, but I think it'd be good to explain it because it's it's mind-blowing.
Okay, yeah, it is. So critical mass happens the last Friday of every month, and it happens not only in Atlanta, but it happens in cities all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the original city, Kathy. Do you?
I don't know.
Okay. It's an Asian country. I just don't know which one. Oddly enough, I think it was an Asian country. I could be wrong about that. But you have people that come together in our downtown area on a bad weather night. You could have up to 60 or 70 people in the spring and in the fall. And when weather is just so magnificent, you could have over 400 people come together. There's not a planned route. I got to give a shout out to another guy that lives in the community. His name is Angel Poventude, and he is the one who really is responsible for critical mass being here. He's the one who, in the very beginning, it was somewhat challenging in terms of how cyclists would conduct themselves once we started out. But he very quickly kind of reined that in, and it's a very well behaved group of cyclists in terms of as best they can following all the rules of the road. And that's always a real challenge when you have 400 people.
Right.
So it's a matter of, a lot of times they do stop and let everybody collect. There is, they are a fairly courteous group. There's always some challenges though when you have that many people out, but it's all ages, all, levels of fitness. It is not as slow rolling as a slow roll. I mean, you're still looking at a lot of people coming out, but, so that's where you also really see our diverse cycling community because everybody from every, style of riding comes together and rides. So do you have a critical mass in your city?
We don't. No, I would love to set something up, but right now we battle the car versus the bike quite a bit here in this town. The drivers are not ready to let the cyclists take over the roads yet.
Yeah, it's still challenging. You still have, plenty of reasons why, motorists, need to get through a traffic light. They don't want to wait. I don't blame them. So it's just a matter of trying to balance that and have everybody understand that, we want to be a peaceful group out there.
Right. Right. And it's one day out of the month. So
Yes,
it's such a great sight to see.
it is.
Maybe I need to make that my goal during this pandemic, is to focus on something fun like planning that, but we'll see.
That would be great. I'd love to help you out with that and put you in touch with Angel, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's pretty amazing.
A quick interruption to tell you this week's sponsor is Thirsty Pigs, a full-service mobile event company offering beer, wine, spirits, plus catering for any indoor or outdoor event. Check out more at thirstypigs.com. Now back to the show. Well, okay, so we're talking about the streets of Atlanta. So I think this is a good segue to get into Bicycle Tours of Atlanta, which is the company that you own. And I think it's obvious, we've talked about it enough, that we're in the middle of this pandemic and it's not appropriate for people to be biking in large groups. So you're not doing that right now. But think back to when we could be out and biking freely. Let's talk about Bicycle Tours of Atlanta.
Okay. As I said earlier, and it was 2008 when the recession hit. And at that time, I really wanted to do something that I would love. And, a few things happened. I had a couple of friends in from out of town. One was from Zurich, one was from Montreal. And I took them on a bike ride. I said, let's go rent bikes while y'all are in town. We did it. And I was shocked at what they saw. Things that I see all the time, things that I just kind of take for granted. And at the end of that, they said, Robyn, we've been coming to Atlanta on business for years. And I had no idea that Atlanta was cool.
Oh,
had no idea that there were all these beautiful neighborhoods. And at that time, I really couldn't tell them anything about anything they were laying their eyes on. I was just saying, this is Atlanta. But it was at that moment I decided that that's what I would do, because the market was, taking a dive. I knew I had to do something. And in 2009 is when I launched the company. And I did other things at the same time. I did a very gradual launching of a business. I bought up some rental bikes, about 12 rental bikes from a shop that was on the Silver Comet Trail at the time. And, so every year they'd get rid of their old fleet. And so I started with used bikes, really just kind of winged it in the beginning, but I knew that I needed to come up with routes that were great for the average Joe. And so I flattened the route as much as I could. And so sometimes we're not going the most direct way to places, but we're definitely going the scenic and most manageable for anyone who maybe even hasn't been on a bike for 10 or 15 years. And that's been actually one of the most incredible experiences of having this company, is having people do the tour and then at the end of it saying either every time I travel now, I'm going to do a bike tour. Or I'm going to go home and buy a bike. I had one woman many years ago send a note back to me and say, I've just bought a bike. And on that tour, she said, I hadn't been on a bike in 10 years. And now we're Facebook friends. I mean, she clocks in, I don't know. I know one time she was clocking in 100 miles a week.
Oh, man, that's such a great story.
So it's just this real opportunity. There's so many great things that I have gotten out of doing this, that my team, my staff, have gotten from these experiences. It's great.
Yeah.
So the company's been around for that long. We've been successful in a lot of ways. And I would say that it, could always be more successful in terms of, more customers over the course of the year, but it's kind of, it's a pretty joyous experience for the most part. And for all the work I do when I'm not on my bike, the payoff is when I'm on my bike with people from all over the world.
What are some examples of the types of tours? Like you said, most of them are flat and scenic, but like when people are like, I want to take a bike tour, like what choices do they have?
Yeah. Well, when we first started, we had a tour called Heart of the City. And we ended up changing the name to Fall in Love with Atlanta. And that is because that was one of the number one things that people would say at some point during the tour or at the end of the tour. Wow, I just fell in love with your city. I had no idea. And so the Fall in Love with Atlanta tour, I would say, is kind of it's a highlights tour. We are next to the Beltline. Our office is next to the Beltline, but we're also in Martin Luther King's birth home neighborhood. So, when people come on the tour, they would experience, going through that neighborhood and through the historic site itself, where the burial site is, where Ebenezer Baptist Church is located. We go up to a place that's called Jackson Street Bridge, which is an iconic spot here in the city. It's if you're a fan of Walking Dead, you would recognize it because it's where the hero is going into the city on a horse and the cars are trying to get out of town. But it is our skyline view of the city. And then we spend some time on one of the bike paths, the Stone Mountain, and it's called Freedom Park Path in the city. And we make our way over into another neighborhood called Old Fourth Ward, which is one of the most rapidly changing neighborhoods. That's great, and it's also challenging in that it's also facing some of the biggest issues around gentrification. So when we take people out, we just show them what they're looking at. We talk about those things that are right in front of them. But in the course of that, they see a lot of great art, as you saw on the post that I was doing. Through another historic neighborhood called Inman Park, one of the first planned communities in the city, where you had a lot of the movers and shakers of early Atlanta, the gentleman who purchased the Coca-Cola formula from the pharmacist, whose name is Asa Candler. His home is there. So you have, turn of the century mansions of the time in that particular neighborhood. And there's other history that we share about that neighborhood as well. It also has some ties to the Civil War. From there, we make our way through Krog Tunnel. Krog Tunnel is what we call kind of ground zero. That was one of the posts I did on the site that you found me on.
Oh, was that the tunnel? Yeah. Not the tunnel. It was almost like
the tunnel with all the art.
Yeah,
it's a tunnel. Yeah. So it's where it's very free form. So people are in there all the time painting, and it's completely allowed. And there's a number of places in our city where that type of graffiti writing goes on all the time, and there's no problem with it. So that's always very interesting. You'll find sometimes beautiful pieces of art. Sometimes you find people picking up the can for the first time, and it looks kind of like scribble, but it's But again, you'll see parents in there with their kids painting. And it's great. And it connects to another historic neighborhood, actually two historic neighborhoods. One's called Reynoldstown, and Reynoldstown was one of the first communities that was established by freed slaves, and that was in 1866. So there's a lot of history there. We spent a good bit of time on that tour when we're on our civil rights tour. And then we also come into another neighborhood called Cabbagetown, originally called Milltown, but it was later known as Cabbagetown because you could always smell cabbage cooking whenever you went in it. But it was that's where the folks who worked in the mill and the factory lived.
Okay.
And, cabbage is poor people's food. And there was a lot of poor folks living in that neighborhood. And today it is actually one of the most expensive neighborhoods in our city on a per square foot basis. It's some of the most expensive shotgun houses you'll ever want to buy. And so it's pretty cool. It's interesting. And we also make our way over to Oakland Cemetery, which is a historic cemetery here in the city that not only is still an active cemetery for burials, but it also is host to music concerts and events, and more weddings take place in the cemetery than burials each year.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a lot of interesting stuff. So that's kind of what you would see and experience on the Fall in Love with Atlanta tour. And in the neighborhood of Cabbagetown, there was an event that started 5 years ago, and it's called Forward Warrior, and that was established by a gentleman whose name is Peter Ferrari. He's an artist himself, and he used to live in that neighborhood. But as that photograph you saw of the tunnel with all the graffiti, well, what used to happen is that graffiti used to spill out of the tunnel and fill up all of these retaining walls that were on one border of that neighborhood. And 5 or 6 years ago, they reached out to Peter and said, hey, you're a mural artist. Do you have any friends? Y'all can come out and paint over this. We'll sponsor it. So long story short, now what we have is a weekend-long event where you'll have 35 to 40 artists painting along this huge wall that is probably, it may be half a mile. I
Oh,
wouldn't be
wow.
surprised if
Okay.
the wall itself is if it's not half a mile, it's close.
Mm-hmm.
And what you have is artists painting on that wall, side by side for 3 days. And then that work stays intact almost for the entire year. There's very little tagging that happens on it. It's honored, people that, they come around, they come out of the graffiti filled tunnel into this area where there's art.
Mm.
I can't say that it doesn't ever get tagged, but for the very most part, and tagged as, that graffiti artists might throw their letters up on it, or,
Sure.
vandalize it, or paint over it, or whatever it might be. But Peter is the curator of that. He does an amazing job. And it's become a really great opportunity for established artists as well as emerging artists to come and paint on this major project that has really become a really big deal here in the city, because all during those 3 days, you have those artists are open to conversations with the public. People are walking up and interacting with the artist, learning about the artist, and it's done a tremendous amount for our city.
Wow, I'm falling in love with Atlanta and I'm not even there.
Wonderful, wonderful.
I'm assuming, what you're describing are all day trips. Do you also offer like overnight or multi-day trips?
I don't. And I will tell you that during this pandemic that we're in, during this crisis that we're in, I am thinking about what are other things that I could do, because what I'm trying to do with this time is really look at, for instance, I think most of us at some point in time go, gosh, I wish things would just stop long enough for me to figure out what it is I want to do.
And here we are,
And
right?
here we are, so I'm trying to make use of that time. And as a matter of fact, tonight, my staff and we're having a potluck gathering on Zoom.
Fun.
We're all going to be having dinner together. Part of what I want to get from my team too is, where are we, collectively, what do we want to be doing? How do we want to take our skills and use this time to really figure out what, as a company and as a team, we would like to be doing next. And with the writing that I've been doing, I am thinking a little bit more about, the bike camping, and if that might be something that we could, pull off with the resources that we have, or just offer it as an outlet, a way for people to connect to do that. Everything we do doesn't have to be, to make money, but I'm definitely looking at what might work next. I've never done a multi-day personally, and it's always been kind of like on my bucket list. RAGBRAI's always been on my bucket list. I know that there's just a totally different experience. There's a lot of value in those experiences.
Yeah. Oh,
As
yeah.
you know.
When you're thinking about, or I'm thinking about the customers that you have, like you mentioned, some of them have not been on a bike in a long time, and you're group riding, which is kind of a new skill set for some people. But how is traffic, or how is it like to bike in Atlanta? Are people, when you see 10 bikes coming at you, I'm sure people are a lot more patient, but how is the traffic with it?
Well, that is a great question. We have really taken pride in taking people that haven't ridden on the streets. A lot of people show up and they didn't even know they were going to be on the street. And, maybe they just thought, oh, it'll be on trails, whatever. But, we spend 10% of the time max on trails. We're in the streets other than that. So, we go through, first off, we fit them properly. A lot of people will come and they'll sit on the bike and their feet will be flat as a pancake. And I'll say, okay, I'm going to raise your seat for you. And they'll go, oh, no, it's good right here. And I go, no, it really isn't. And so, we really coach people in the process. And while we're raising their seat, we give them an opportunity. If they insist on starting with, their seat way too low, we let them start. It doesn't take them. They know by the time they've done the test ride that we need to raise their seat. But
Right.
sometimes it's easier for them to know that than for me to try to convince them. We make sure everybody is fitted properly for starters. We have 10 minutes at least with our groups that we go through, calling out commands, car up, car back, stopping, turning right, turning left, the whole thing. It's legal to ride doubled up in the city of Atlanta. So whenever we are on streets that it's safest for us just to ride doubled up, we do. Whenever there's two lanes going in the same direction, we ride doubled up. There's just no question about it. We approach every intersection doubled up. So we have a real strict protocol that gives everybody, I think, a real sense of safety. And for a lot of people, it's the first time they ever actually realize that if it's done properly, you can ride on the streets.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's also a real exciting thing, I think, when all of us have people at the end of the tour that just feel so empowered by that experience. The fact that, and the other thing that's great, we are really selective about the roads that we choose. We don't ride during rush hour, although we could now, but in normal circumstances,
right.
We ride generally between 9 and 3:30. Those are generally when our tours happen. We do evening rides in very selected areas if we have like a private event. But, again, if it's rush hour, it's pretty limited where we would take people on a private tour during rush hour. So we really have, I think, a pretty solid protocol that, again, and by the end of it, everybody is yelling. I mean, we don't just go over the commands. We actually are in the parking lot and we're yelling in the parking lot. They have to repeat every command after us in their outdoor voices. So they all feel a little odd, but we know if they don't yell there, they won't share that information once we get out and roll. So it's a totally new experience for a lot of people.
And it's an amazing skill set for them to take back.
Yeah.
Even if go ahead.
No, I was going to say, even especially with families with young riders, it's real exciting for those kids to, for us to know that those kids are going to go back, and when the next time they're riding in the neighborhood with their friends, that there's a good chance that they will have shared that skill set. Oh, yeah. I love that. What is your website in case people who are listening to this want to check out what you have? Sure. It's biketoursatl.com. And if you just type in Bicycle Tours of Atlanta, we fortunately come up for the first page or more. Awesome. That's great. A quick interruption to tell you this week's podcast is sponsored by Lizard Lips Lip Balm. These great lip balms contain natural ingredients, come in a variety of flavors, and you can choose certified organic or balms with sun protection. Check it out at lizardlips.net. Now back to the show. Going back to you, have you done any bike adventures that you want to share? I love that, spoiler, you gave me some questions before, but I love it that you were going to ask that. I had the amazing privilege of going to Cuba the last week in February. Ooh. Now, I say that because it was Cuba, but I also say that because it was the last week in February. And when we got to the airport in Havana, nobody was wearing a mask. When we left 5 days later, everybody had masks on that were working at the airport. So that's how just under the wire we got in there. I went with a friend of mine who goes almost annually. This was her 21st trip. She goes, and there's always different programs that she goes in with. She went in with a program that actually serves animals through a organization called the Spanky Project, and they spay and neuter animals when this whole project comes into a city. And I just got to give them a plug too. It's called the Spanky Project, and they spayed and neutered 547 pets during the 5 days that they were there. Oh my goodness. It was unbelievable. So the gift for me was that I got to go under this, bringing supplies. I spent some time at the clinic, but most of the time, honestly, I was kind of exploring. And I did 3 different bicycle tours with 3 different companies, bicycle tour companies in Cuba. And I was fortunate enough to be the only person that scheduled a tour on each one of those tours. Oh, wow. Private tours. It was a private tour. And, the first day I went out, it was spectacular. Went out with this young man whose name was Elvis. What was really wonderful about this one-on-one experience was that I really got to ask them about their lives and what it's like to be in Cuba. This young man was he's a chemist. And so he had an opportunity to do a bicycle tour. And, the economy in Cuba is so interesting that it's actually more, financially productive for him to leave his chemist job and come do a bicycle tour.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it was a real interesting, it was just interesting to learn about how the Cuban economy works, and how dependent the Cuban people are on tourism, because it is the only kind of segment of that population that there's more of a free market opportunity. It was very interesting. So the first day I was out with Elvis, he showed me kind of the basic stuff, or at least, what you would normally see. But I also told him, I said, I really don't want to see the tourist traps. I'd rather see, what Cuba's like.
Yeah, the
what
real
is it like
stuff.
for you, the real stuff. Second day, I had a second, I told Abraham, my tour guide for the second day, what I had already seen. And he says, okay, well, we're going to go see other stuff.
Oh, gosh.
And we even went to his house and I met his family. I mean, it was amazing.
Oh, this sounds awesome.
It was so awesome. And, third day, told that gentleman what I had seen. And he says, okay, I'm going to show you some other stuff. It was just awesome.
Wow.
And I had kind of decided I wanted to do, what's real funny is my friend, Kit, is her name. She was like, yeah, well, you're going to want to take all these pictures of all these people on bikes. And there was certainly a lot of that, but I was kind of fixated on the whole cat thing. And I was like taking pictures of cats everywhere. And all my guides were like, okay, look, I see a cat over here. Let's go. I mean, it was crazy. But learning about and in each of these individual young men were really experiencing Cuba in a different way as well. One of the gentlemen had actually lived in Holland and in France before he came back to Cuba. And so his perspective of Cuba was very different than these other two, even younger men that had never left Cuba. Never left Cuba, never been off of the island. It was just unbelievable. There's two different economies. There's the tourism economy. There's the economy that most of there's the peso economy, and then there's other money that's used in the tourism economy. It was unbelievable, eye-opening. I would encourage anybody who is listening and wants to go to Cuba to schedule private tours with these individuals. Because you can still see all the same things, but the ability to really learn and ask the questions that you want to ask and understand about that country, that you just can't do in a group. And I know that from my own times when I've had just individual people join my tour. It's a totally different experience. You really open up and you learn, who your guest is, and they learn who you are.
Man, we could do a whole podcast on your Cuba adventure. I'm so intrigued.
Oh, I mean, it is unbelievable. It is, it is there. And here's the thing for all your listeners. If you're thinking, ooh, I just don't know how in the world I could ever go to Cuba. Well, the Spanky Project operates 3 times a year doing this program. And what that project needs is they need people who can support the mission by bringing the biggest suitcases filled with all the kind of supplies they need to accomplish this mission. And you can get involved in that program. And that's one of the ways you can go to Cuba. And you don't have to, you can volunteer at the clinic one day. But it's, there's a lot of different ways to go.
Right.
And that's a great way to go. If you have a soft spot for cats and dogs, it is a remarkable experience. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to the Spanky Project, and they have a video of this last event. It was mind-blowing. And in Cuba, if you have a pet, that's kind of a status symbol, because, there's plenty of stray animals all over these cities. They're everywhere. But if you have an animal, that you're able to, well, first off, getting it spayed or neutered, that's a whole nother level of prestige. So it was pretty remarkable.
Wow.
It was remarkable.
I'm super intrigued by this. This is awesome. So I don't know if you can beat going to Cuba, but do you have any adventures on the horizon once this pandemic's over?
Well, I've always been interested in the barge tours, in Holland and different places like that.
Yeah.
Those have really intrigued me. I would say that I'm probably at the very beginning of really looking at what's next. I know there's some great tours in Croatia. that's kind of been, on my list. It's probably a little further out, but there's just so many. You go to these different international bike touring sites, and it's just unbelievable what's
Yeah.
available.
Very
Yeah.
cool. Very cool. Okay, last question.
Okay.
And think about the customers that are probably anxiously waiting for the pandemic to be over so they can get back on their bikes and join your tours. But any advice you'd give someone who wants to start riding their bike more?
I would, again, right now is the easiest time. It's the best time of year, where I am anyway. I know you've got snow on the ground, but
Yeah.
it's just the best time of year. And I say, if you can find just one other person, and I would say find one other person who's already committed to riding.
Mm-hmm.
Not, hey, let's pick up riding. Find somebody that's already committed to riding. And, they don't have to be someone that rides hard all the time, but they enjoy getting out and riding.
Mm-hmm.
And, hook your wagon to them and see if you can get out and ride with them, or find 3 or 4 people.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think sometimes it's easy just to get stuck inside, especially with what we're all dealing with.
Right.
But number one, it is the easiest time in our lifetime all over the world to ride your bike on the streets.
Mm-hmm.
There's no better time. And then find somebody that's willing to hold your feet to the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like, get yourself on that bike. Let's go.
Great advice. Well, Robyn, thank you so, so much for being on the podcast. I'm so glad that I got to meet you and hear about Bicycle Tours of Atlanta and all your adventures.
Well, thanks for thinking of me. I enjoyed sharing my city with you.
Yeah, I definitely adding that to the list, a place to come, Atlanta, Georgia.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you, Robyn Elliott, for coming on to talk about your company, Bicycle Tours of Atlanta. And if you happen to find yourself in Atlanta once businesses start to reopen, you can use code Murphology to get a discount on your next tour with Bicycle Tours of Atlanta. If you have a topic or the name of a cyclist you find interesting, email me at MurphologyPodcast@gmail.com. You can go to MurphologyPodcast.com to find some good info, and I recently launched a YouTube channel, so if you want to see videos of some of the places that I bike, check that out. I'll leave you with this quote from the Unwritten Book of Murphology. This quote is from Thomas Edison. "Our greatest weakness lies in giving up. The most certain way to succeed is always to try just one more time." Think about it.